Alrighty, welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, it's December 6th around here, and we have a great show for you today. I want to start with a couple of the hypotheticals we have going into the CFP weekend. A lot of different things that could possibly happen. Want to break down all the different variations for you, including that Clemson win. We'll see what happens there. Then, early signing day. Want to do a little bit of a wrap-up there, give you the top 10 teams who had the best day on signing day and throughout the weekend, who kind of struggled on signing day, and definitely two conferences that don't want to hear it, definitely really struggled. Then we'll get to the transfer portal updates. I'll get to a ton of the quarterbacks that I've already jumped in, including one of my favorite quarterbacks in the group. Then the wide receivers, a lot of really, really talented wide receivers. We'll get to a couple of defenders, and we'll figure out where we all stand in the portal right about now. Then we'll get to the players and the coaches under the most pressure as we head into this week, and then we'll do a little bit of a wrap-up. We'll get to all the headlines of the weekend, and then we'll get to a couple of injury updates as you guys need to know it. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $, add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that, and we can have a good back and forth here. But let's get into this, and we'll start with the playoff hypotheticals, because this has been a big-time question. We're getting into a weekend where just about everything is going to be decided one way or the other. Is it going to be Bama in the field? Is it going to be Clemson and SMU? Is it going to be UNLV? Could it be a ton of other teams? So a lot of different things at play here, and I wanted to kind of go through all the scenarios that we have in front of us as we get into this weekend, and we'll start with the one that, as it sits just right now. If the season were to end today, you know what we have. We obviously have the Penn State-Arizona State matchup, Notre Dame-Bama, UGA-Indiana, as well as Ohio State-Tennessee, which feels to be the safest matchup. I do have one here that would flip that around a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily expect it to happen, but we'll see what happens there, and we'll start with maybe the cleanest one of the bunch, which is just UNLV gets a win. That's really the only thing that happens this weekend. For the majority of these, we'll just talk about it as if it's just this one thing. If only UNLV wins and everything else goes chalk, and then when we flip, we'll do just that thing, and then everything else goes chalk, just to make it a little bit easier for everyone. But UNLV wins. I think this is the cleanest of the bunch. I think UNLV probably slides up to that 12 spot, Arizona State to that 4 seed, and you just move forward from there. Pretty much everything is the exact same. You have 3 of the same matchups that you have right now. You just have UNLV in that 12 position. I don't think they would jump the Big 12 champion. Maybe there's a little bit of mobility there, but they're at 12. Big 12 champion would be at probably 14, 15. I would have to assume that's enough of a gap. So I assume that it would be UNLV slotting in at the 12. You would have ASU over to the 4 position, and it would still be a great place for Penn State to be. No doubt about that. They would still be favored by double digits by both these teams, and they would be in a great position to make a little bit of a run here. Oregon would definitely get a little bit of a tough draw, no doubt about that. So a lot of different things that could happen here. I think this is going to be a really, really fun matchup. I think that Penn State-UNLV one could be really, really interesting to watch. But that's a pretty clean one. Just UNLV beats Boise State. That's all we have to worry about. Now, let's get into a couple others. And we'll start with, what if Oregon loses to Penn State? This is one that's kind of had a little bit of debate around this time of year, where you have Texas and you have Penn State. Penn State's only 1 spot behind Texas. They would have beaten the number 1 team in the country. Could they slide above Texas? Could they slide to that number 1 position? I would probably have them at the 2 position. I think that's probably the right way to do it. I think that's probably the way that they will do it. That being said, it's not necessarily a guarantee. It could just be Penn State jumps to the 1, Texas stays at the 2, and that's that. And then, obviously, there's another scenario where maybe Texas is the one that falls. And then you would probably still have Oregon at number 1. You'd probably get Georgia at number 2. And then some interesting things would happen, I think. I think you could have Penn State stay at 5 and then Texas slide to 3. I think you could have Penn State slide down 1 more spot and Texas sit in at 4. And you could even have Notre Dame fall a little bit and kind of shuffle some things around. But the way that I see it, it's probably going to be Texas falling just a little bit because of the loss to Georgia. Penn State probably staying where they are right about now, and maybe Notre Dame slotting down a spot. That's the way that I would see it happening. I do think there's a little bit of debate there. It could be kind of up for interpretation on that one, but the way that I see it, I do think that it's one of those things where if Texas were to fall to Georgia, I think they'd probably slide down to the 6, Texas would slide up to the 2, and then Notre Dame would slide down to the 7, and that would probably be it. Maybe they would slide down to the 7 below Notre Dame. I'd be a little bit surprised, but with the rankings, really a lot of different things could happen here. So those are the two ones where you have the big time team losing. You have the number 1 seed or the number 2 seed losing. You have a little bit of shifting with the seeds here and there, but not necessarily anything too aggressive. Definitely some different ers and ahs there that will be really fun to watch. I think we have Texas, Bama, two of the best rosters in the country. We got to see it last year. It was absolutely incredible. So that would be back in Austin. That would be a really fun one. Notre Dame, Indiana, getting an in-state matchup would be a ton of fun. I think that would be really cool. Then you also have obviously get Penn State, Arizona State. That's the same that it's always been. If you flip this, then it would be Oregon, Arizona State, and a little bit of a Pac-12 rematch. So a lot of different things that could happen in this scenario. And I think Texas getting Bama would be an incredible matchup, would be a really fun one to watch. Obviously, that one could flip around just a little bit as well. Maybe Texas would slide to the 5 and Penn State to the 6. Maybe Notre Dame wouldn't move and Texas would just drop to the 7. So a lot of different things that could happen here. The way that I see it, Texas probably isn't dropping below Notre Dame, but very well could depending on the result there. So a lot of different, variations here. I think Texas probably wouldn't drop below the 6 position. They could possibly drop to the 7 or probably not the 8 if I'm being totally honest. I think the 8 is probably reserved for only this reality. And actually, let's get to this one first. Texas and Oregon both lose. That's a big time question here, and I think this would be relatively easy if I had to imagine. You have Penn State and Oregon would probably just flip positions. I think Texas would probably slide down to the 6, Notre Dame to the 7, UGA to the 2. Would make for some really fun matchups. You'd have Oregon, Arizona State in a little bit of a big Pac-12 rematch. You'd have Texas, Bama. You'd have Indiana, Notre Dame. You'd have Ohio State, Tennessee. And then you could have a lot of different matchups in the second round that could be really fun to watch. You have Texas, SMU possibly in an in-state Texas matchup. You'd have Oregon, Boise State, a little bit of rematch from earlier this year. You could have Ohio State, Penn State, same exact thing. Or Tennessee, Penn State, a little bit of an interesting matchup that we haven't seen in a long time. And then you could have Indiana, UGA. You could have Notre Dame, UGA. Both would be absolutely incredible, no doubt about that, and definitely would be a lot of juice in those 4 games. So cannot wait. This is going to be a really interesting matchup, and definitely could be a situation where both these teams lose. You have Penn State and UGA slotted into those bye positions, and then we just have to figure out what Oregon and Texas will do. Do they fall to the 5-6? Do they fall to the 6-7, or even a little bit lower? But moving forward, this is the one where I think that 8-9 matchup could possibly change. Now, I'm not necessarily betting on this. I do think there's different variations here that could have different implications when you go around this. But when I look at Penn State, if they were to get blown out by Oregon, if they were to get beaten by 14, 17, 21, I do think this door opens a little bit. I think you would have the same 4 seeds in terms of the byes. You would have Oregon, Texas, SMU, Boise State. Then you would get a little bit crazy. I do think Notre Dame, apologies, I do think possibly Notre Dame would slide into that 5 position, maybe even to the 6, possibly, depending on how that would work. I think Ohio State would get the other one there. And then I do think Penn State would slide to the 7. I think UGA could slide to the 8. So that's kind of the question here is, what would the variation be if Penn State were to get blown out? Would they fall them below Ohio State because they do have that loss to them? Would they keep them above Ohio State because they don't want to punish them for playing in the Big Ten Championship? That is going to be a huge debate. That's really the only reality that I see that 8-9 matchup switching from Ohio State and Tennessee. I think that one's relatively set in stone right now. Maybe there's a little bit of an opening if Penn State were to get blown out. I'd be a little bit surprised if I'm being totally honest. I'm not going to lie to you, but at the end of the day, I do think this would make for some chaos on Selection Sunday. You'd have Notre Dame ASU, which would be a very interesting matchup. You'd have Ohio State Bama, which is just about as good as it gets in college football. Penn State Indiana would be a huge matchup in the Big Ten that we didn't get to see this year, and then UGA Tennessee, a little bit of a rematch of the one that happened in Athens. This one would be right back there, so it'd be really interesting to see how that would unfold. And this is a little bit more of a variant one. I don't necessarily think they would drop Penn State that low, but if they were to get beaten by 21 points, I think there's a good argument for Ohio State being ranked above them, and then you just got to figure out what you do with everyone else. So a lot of different things that would go around here. Maybe Penn State would fall to the 8, depending on the way the Georgia-Texas game went. So a lot of different variations here. We'll see what happens, but overall, I think this is probably the most chaotic version of it, and we'll see what happens on Selection Sunday if Oregon were to pull it out by 21 points, let's just say, against Penn State. And then this one, the one that pretty much everyone's talking about right about now, and I think this one's relatively clean as well, if I'm being totally honest. If Clemson were to beat SMU, I do think Clemson would likely slot up to that 4 position. I think they would jump the Big 12 champion. They're at 15-16 right now. Clemson's at 17. You have SMU at 8. I have to assume they would slot above SMU, if I'm being totally honest. It definitely would be a little bit of a debate, but the way that I see it, I do think SMU would I do think they would slot into the bye position. Boise State would obviously go up one more, and then Arizona State would stay at that 12 position. So we'd have a lot of the same internal matchups. I do think SMU would stay in the field. I am being a little bit hopeful with that. If I'm being totally honest, I can't confirm that. I can't even promise that they're going to make the right decision there. But at the end of the day, I'm going to say SMU would be in this scenario. That would be the only matchup that would change. Notre Dame, SMU, I think would unfold, and then you still have Ohio State, Tennessee, you'd still have Penn State, Arizona State, you still have UGA, Indiana. So not a ton of stuff would change here. I do think Clemson would get that bye. Possibly they would slot into that 12, and then Arizona State would get the bye. So there's a lot of different things moving around in this one, and this is obviously the one that everyone's kind of watching for. I like to believe that SMU would be in this scenario. Can't necessarily promise that. So we'll see what happens in that game, and then we'll see what happens going forward. But we've gone through all the hypotheticals. We've gone through all the craziness. How about if everything goes the way that I expect it to go? If my picks bear out the way that I expect them to, this is the way that I think it will play out. I have UNLV beating Boise State. I would have them at the 12 seed playing Penn State on the road. Would be an incredible matchup. I have Iowa State beating Arizona State this upcoming weekend. I think they'd slot into the 4. I think Clemson would slot just above them into the 3 with a win over SMU. I think SMU would slide down to the 11, and that would definitely add a little bit of flavor to this. Obviously, the 8-9 and the 7-10 matchup would go unchanged. The top 2 seeds would go unchanged, but just about everything would change. You would have Penn State, UNLV, you would have Notre Dame, SMU, and then you could have a possible ACC you could have a possible ACC rematch. You could have Penn State, Iowa State in the second round. A lot of different things that could happen from there, but that's the way that I see it. If things go the way that I expect this weekend, tonight, and tomorrow, that's the way I see this playing out. Now, I can't promise that if Clemson were to win, that SMU would be in. I like to think that they would, and I'll leave it at that for the time being. We'll find out what the selection committee does on Sunday, but the way that I see it, if they leave SMU out, if Clemson were to win, I got some problems. If they put Bama in, we're going to have some interesting conversations on Monday. I'll just leave it at that for the time being. We'll get into that, obviously, in time, and hopefully they make the right decision there. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about early signing day. A lot of different stuff has happened throughout this week. We'll break it down, the winners and the losers, all of the different stuff you need to know right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. Some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of these CFP hypotheticals, a lot of different things that could go down this weekend and change the way the seedings work, change the way which teams are in. So a lot of different things that could happen, and we'll obviously break it down on Monday when all of this stuff unfolds. But let's get into early signing day. Let's talk about all the things that have happened over the last couple of days, because it's been quite a few things. Definitely a very busy last couple of days around the recruiting world, and it's definitely a lot of different things that could happen in the next couple of days, and really the next couple of hours. With that guy right there, Justice Terry, we'll talk about him here in a second. But let's start with that top 10 rankings, because we talked about it on Wednesday when we got together. Texas was on track to get that number one spot. They have that number one spot right now. It's still very much up for grabs. A lot of different things that will happen over the next little bit that will put these other classes in better standing, including Justice Terry for possibly Georgia. So a lot of different things in variation here. We'll see what happens in the grand scheme of things, but Texas is in that pole position right now. They are the number one team in the country. Alabama right there, Georgia, Oregon, Ohio State round out the top 5. Then you get a little bit crazy. You do have Auburn, you do have Michigan, and you have obviously LSU, A&M, Tennessee, not quite as crazy. Tennessee able to lock down David Sanders, which was absolutely huge. One of the can't-miss prospects of this entire class, and they were able to lock him down. Then you do have Notre Dame, or you have Florida, Notre Dame, USC, Miami, and Ole Miss sitting right on the outside looking into the top 10. A lot of really, really good classes here, and a couple of classes that are ranked a little bit lower than what their normal average would give you. I believe Oregon has the highest average of the entire country. They only have a certain number of commits. I believe only 21, if I'm not mistaken. So a lot of different things happening around there that maybe the ranking isn't quite as representative. I love to see the average recruit ranking. I feel like that's probably the best way to go about it. So definitely, if you would like to look at that, you're more than welcome to. I believe Oregon's 1, Alabama 2, Texas 3, if I'm not mistaken on that one. So a lot of different things to kind of go into this, and a lot of different ways to measure different programs and how they did on the, throughout this week. But Texas definitely dominated the day in a lot of different ways. But for me, I think when you look at the winners, Oregon sets the pace. They had an incredible weekend. They got Naheem Offord, the number 2 cornerback in the country. They got Saigo Pulatele, the top 10 quarterback in the country. 2 really talented guys. They got to flip to them. It sounds like Naheem Offord might have a shoe on the way, so be on the lookout for that. Definitely a little bit of feather in the cap for Oregon when they're recruiting, but 2 very, very talented guys. It didn't stop there. They were able to keep Dallas Wilson in the fray, where it felt like Florida was making a real push for him. They were able to keep him a part of the class, and now they have the top wide receiver in the country in Decorian Moore. They also have the number 4 in Dallas Wilson. So it's elite. It's exactly what you would expect Oregon to do after the year that they've had and the last couple of years that they've had, but really remarkable stuff. This program continues to improve every single year. They got a couple of big-time offensive tackles and offensive linemen as well, so it's a ridiculous class. There's no doubt about that. Every single player is elite. Every single player I expect to be a huge effect, and I think Naheem Offord in this cornerback class is just absolutely ridiculous. They're going to be really, really good on that back end for quite some time, and definitely Dan Lanning is setting them up in an incredible place. And then you do have Texas, the number 1 team in the country. They obviously had a very, very nice weekend. They got a couple of huge commitments from Michael Terry, the 5-star number 1 athlete in the country, likely going to be a little bit of a running back wide receiver hybrid when he's at Texas. Very talented kid, definitely one of those guys that Sark was very excited to get in his class. And then Cade Phillips, the 4-star or 5-star, depending on where you're looking, safety or corner, depending on where you're looking. A very talented kid. He flipped from LSU to Texas. This was a huge one, no doubt about that. That back-end class was very talented. The safeties were playing really well. Adding a guy that can play safety or corner is huge, and Cade Phillips is definitely that guy. Very, very talented kid, and definitely one of those that can totally change what your back-end looks like. So that's a huge pickup. They also got Jamie French to pick Texas over Florida at the end of the day. No craziness there. Josiah Sharma ended up getting into the class, so no major changes late, which is huge. You know, when you don't have that huge flip that you weren't expecting or anything crazy like that, you're in pretty good shape. Did miss out on Michael Fasusi, and Oklahoma was able to pick him up. Huge for them. Not the greatest week for Oklahoma. We'll talk about them here in a second, but overall, that's a huge commitment and definitely one that Texas badly wanted, but you're in a great place. There's no doubt about that. A little bit weak in the trenches this time around, but at the end of the day, probably the deepest position that Texas has on their roster right now. So not necessarily the top of the list in terms of what they needed to do in this cycle. I totally understand where they landed here. Obviously, a lot of wide receivers, a lot of talented back-end players. Probably want a little bit more from the offensive line in the portal, but we'll see. We'll see how good they feel. I mean, Trevor Gooseby came in last week and did absolutely incredible work on that offensive line. So maybe they feel great about the guys they have behind the scenes and didn't feel the need to go out and get someone special in this class at least. Then you do have Florida at 11. They had a very, very nice weekend, and it was a little bit up and down. You know, they missed out on Jamie French. They missed out on Dallas Wilson when it felt like they might be able to pick them up, but did flip Hilton Stubbs before signing day from Miami, Lagonza Hayward from from Tennessee was a huge one. Joseph Mbachu from Texas. A lot of really talented guys in this class. And obviously, they need to make some portal moves. There's no doubt about that. But this is the class you need. No doubt. I mean, when you have Billy Napier coming back for another year, being able to show all of the boosters, show all of the people around there that you're capable of getting a near top 10 class, it's huge. It's definitely putting things in the right direction there. You put DJ Lagway with a couple of these big-time playmakers on the outside. It's going to be special stuff. Still a ton of work to do in the portal, no doubt about that, but they're in a really good position, and this week was very kind to the Florida Gators. And then you do have South Carolina. They'll be able to build up a little momentum they've had during the season, was able to flip Damola Ajitahun, very talented offensive lineman for Georgia Tech, got Christian Ingram in kind of a battle with Tennessee and a couple others, a huge pickup for them, and this program continues to rise. You know, the 20th class isn't going to hit you over the head or anything like that. They still have to do some work in the portal, but at the end of the day, what Shane Beamer is doing over there has been absolutely incredible. They continue to build something really special, and it feels like a group that is going to be an awesome group for them. I think the offensive linemen, especially in that class, are really, really talented. It's going to be awesome to watch what South Carolina can do with this one, because this feels like the one that could take them to that next level. It feels like the one that could be around when they flip that switch from a 9-win team to a possible playoff team. It'll be awesome to see what this class can do. And then Florida State was able to flip the switch just a little bit on National Signing Day and pick up a couple of big-time commitments. They got Usman Kroma, a very talented running back that was flipped from Georgia. Javon Boggs flipped from UCF, kind of probably staying with Gus Malzahn if I had to imagine. So a lot of different things to like about this class. 25 still not good enough. I think they understand that. You know, Mike Norvell gets that. They're going to have an elite portal class and then see what happens in 2025 and get right back on track. But overall, I think this is a good class to start off. Probably going to need a little bit more next year, and then so on and so on. It'll be interesting to see what Florida State can do on the trail the next little bit, because haven't necessarily been quite as committed to the trail as some other teams have. They've done an incredible job this year. We'll see what they can do in 2025 and in the portal the rest of this year. And then you do have the losers. I'll start with Oklahoma here, and frankly, Oklahoma was fine. It wasn't necessarily like the bottom falled out or anything aggressive. They did get Michael Fasusi, was able to hold on to him, one of the biggest wins of the week, no doubt about that. They did lose 3 big-time receivers, though. Grayson Harris, Cortez Mills, as well as Marcus Harris, really, really talented players. All guys that can make a big-time effect on what you're going to do offensively, and the offense is going to need a lot of work in the portal. They've already lost a couple of guys. We'll talk about them next segment, and they're going to have to do a lot of filling. There's no doubt about that. I think they had a fine week for the most part. You know, getting Michael Fasusi in the class is absolutely huge. The skill positions are not necessarily elite in this class by any means. I think they have some guys that can make some plays. They're going to need to do a lot of work in the portal. There's no doubt about that. They knew that going into the offseason, so nothing's really changed about what their approach is, but definitely a lot more need around that wide receiver position than there was even a couple of days ago. So a lot of things to figure out around there. Definitely not the week that they were outright hoping for. They got Michael Fasusi. That's more than fine of a consolation prize, but lost a lot of really talented players on the outside. For LSU, they were able to get another offensive lineman in Solomon Thomas from Florida State, so that's a huge win. We're able to keep DJ Pickett in the fold, which is a massive win. They did lose out on the best player in Louisiana, which is Jakeem Stewart. He is going to USC. He is committed there, as well as losing Cade Phillips. This was a tough week for LSU. It was a fine week. They were able to hold on to that top 10 class. They were able to do the things that they needed to do. It definitely showed some of the holes in LSU's recruiting. It definitely showed that maybe they're not swinging the biggest stick in terms of NIL. Maybe they're not even swinging close to the biggest stick in terms of NIL. So a lot of things need to happen around there. The portal is going to be huge for LSU this year, and we'll talk about that here in a second. They already have their eyes on a couple of different players from the portal, but overall, probably not the week that LSU wanted to have. If they were able to keep Cade Phillips in the class, if they were able to get Jakeem Stewart to commit to them, it would have been a huge week. It would have been a possibly program-changing and gotten everything right back on track type of week. They didn't do that. They're in a really interesting position, and this portal class is as important as really anyone since they were able to pick up Joe Burrow a little bit ago in LSU. So a lot of different things that need to happen around there, and this recruiting class is more than fine to kind of bridge the gap. They're going to need to do a lot more work in the portal, no doubt about that. And then you do have Clemson at 26. They're 4th in the ACC. They're way, way too low on this list right about now, and they're going to have to do work in a place that they have not done work in at all under Dabo Swinney, which is the portal. They're going to have to find guys in the portal. They only have 15 commits in this class. They do have some great players, including Amari Adams, including Braden Jacobs, really talented players in this group. They're not doing enough. There's no doubt about that. When you have Miami scaling the way that they are, when you have Florida State finding their footing, when you have a team like Georgia Tech that's ranked above you right now in recruiting, you have a lot of things to figure out. You have a lot of different things that you're going to have to find out over the next little bit about your team, about your program, and you're going to have to go into the portal one way or the other. If you don't go into the portal, this weekend is going to be the last time for a while that we see Clemson in the ACC championship, because they're getting a little bit less talented every single year. They're getting a little bit closer to the pack every single year. They have to figure this out. 26th is just not remotely good enough if you're going to be the class of the ACC going forward. That being said, with the Big 12 in the ACC, wasn't necessarily the best week for them. It hasn't been the best week for them in quite some time on National Signing Day, if we're being totally honest, and this is a huge reason why people go towards SEC bias or go towards the Big 10 when they're talking about the playoff. It's because of this. The SEC brought in 18 5-stars in their classes this cycle. Big 10 brought in 9 5-star players, really talented guys. ACC snagged 2. Big 12 came up with 1. Notre Dame came up with 1. So the entirety of the Big 12 came up with the same exact number of 5-stars as Notre Dame did. That's not good enough. I think we all understand that. That is why people lean towards the SEC. That is why, in some ways, that I lean towards the SEC. Because they're a little bit bigger, they're a little bit faster, they're a little bit stronger, and that bears itself out in pretty much every facet of this game. Whether it's which teams win national titles, which teams get the most guys drafted, which teams have the most first-rounders, all of that goes towards the SEC and the Big Ten. It continues to play out on National Signing Day. It's one of those things that has become kind of a tradition around the recruiting world. It is going to be the SEC and the Big Ten setting the pace, and then everyone else just has to figure out what they're doing right behind them. But overall, obviously, we have shown this year that it's not necessarily the end-all, be-all by any means. There's a lot of talented teams out there, a lot of talented players, but it just gives you an idea of the gap that is forming between the SEC and Big Ten and everyone else. And it definitely bears itself out pretty much every single National Signing Day. But we're not all the way home yet. A lot of different things that will happen over the next month or so as we get to the full signing day on, I believe, February 8th or so. I can't remember the exact day, but right around that time frame, you'll figure out what exactly your class is. The biggest one to come off the board will come off the board later today. Justice Terry will be committing at noon today. Feels like it's going to be Georgia. It feels like everything is pointing towards the Bulldogs right now. I still think Texas will have something to say. Auburn possibly as well, but the way that I see it, it's probably going to be Georgia, and then we'll see if any chaos happens. Maybe there's a little bit of chaos. Maybe Texas can bolster that number 1 class that they've been able to build up, but a remarkable couple of days, and probably going to continue to get a little bit crazy. You have to assume that there's a couple of twists and turns that we're not expecting, and we'll update you on those as they come. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about the transfer portal updates. A lot of different things happening, including this wide receiver class in the transfer portal is absolutely elite. We'll talk about it right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the early signing day, gave you a little bit of an update on everyone that won the week, everyone that lost the week. Definitely a lot of stuff that will continue to happen around the recruiting world, but let's talk about the other part of recruiting. Let's talk about the transfer portal, because a lot of people have started to turn their focus there. Early signing day is coming to an end today. Definitely a lot of coaches and other staff members making their plans for what the portal is going to look like for them. And let's go ahead and jump into this thing because we got a lot of players in here. We got a lot of guys to talk about, and we'll start with the quarterbacks because I think it's a relatively interesting group with a lot of different guys. You have Connor Wegman kind of starting the pace here. I think overall this group is really impressive. The top 4 guys to me are the ones that kind of stand out. I think those are immediate starters somewhere. I think they will be game changers somewhere. The rest of the guys will likely get starting jobs somewhere, including Sluka, Castellanos, and Coulandria, but I think those top 4 guys are your real difference makers in this group if I had to imagine. For Wegman, it was just the best for both parties. I think everyone understood that he was going to leave A&M at some point. I think everyone understood why he was going to leave A&M. It made total sense for both parties. Definitely wasn't the greatest fit for what Colin Klein liked to do in that offense, and it looks like there's a couple of different options out there. Syracuse is one, Missouri's another, Houston is another. He's from the Houston area. If Willie Fritz was able to pull him in, that would be huge. There's no doubt about that. That would be a player that could totally take them to the next level down there and give them a real shot to possibly compete in the Big 12. Then you do have Syracuse, a really interesting one that you saw what Kyle McCord can do this year. So Connor Wegman, I think, has the arm talent that Kyle McCord has. I think he would have the ability to execute that offense at a really high level. For Missouri, I mean, you're taking over for Brady Cook in an offense that is taking a little bit of a back turn this year, but still has a lot of talent in that room, still has a lot of guys that can make some plays. It'll be interesting to see if he wants to stick in the SEC or he wants to play around with the Big 12 or the ACC. I think there's a lot of different options here. Maybe that proximity to Houston gives them a little bit of an edge here. Definitely will be interesting to watch, and if Willie Fritz is able to pull him in, going to watch out for the Cougars next year. It'll be interesting to see what they can do. And then Miller Moss at number 2, a very talented guy. I still think he has an NFL future. I think this guy's arm talent is very clear. His poise in the pocket is good at times, not good at the others. Definitely one of those things that he's going to have to work on, but it looks like he could go the Jack Plummer, the Tyler Shuck path. Sounds like Louisville is the leader here. It would be a great fit. Him and Jeff Brom feel like a match made in heaven. I think he would do an incredible job. I think he would do maybe even better than Jack Plummer and Tyler Shuck did there. I think he's a very talented guy. If Louisville was able to pull him in, I think it'd be a really fun team and definitely one that could possibly compete for a CFP spot next year. But definitely will be interesting to watch. Still a couple of teams to watch here outside of Louisville, but looks like that's the team to beat. Looks like the Cardinals are the ones you're going to want to watch, and we'll see what happens going forward there. For Jackson Arnold, the one that came out pretty much immediately when he left Oklahoma was Mississippi State, which makes sense. We have Jeff Lebby there, the old offensive coordinator for him. I think he would fit into that system very well. The question is, how well do they feel about Michael Van Buren? Do they go away from Michael Van Buren to go towards Jackson Arnold? Definitely a big-time question here. And then you have a couple others. You have Auburn. You have maybe UGA being involved in this one, which will be very interesting with their quarterback group they have. A group that is very talented, not necessarily quite as proven. It will be interesting to see if they go Jackson Arnold's route, if they feel confident in what Jackson Arnold can bring them compared to a Jaden Rashada or a Gunnar Stockton next year. Definitely will be an interesting conversation, and if Georgia brings this guy in, I have to assume it's for him to compete for the starting job. So definitely something to watch there. Georgia, I'm a little bit less likely to see this happening with, but maybe it does, and definitely Auburn and Mississippi State, I think, are two really big ones to watch here. For Caden Salter, a very talented guy that can do all types of things athletically, and two very interesting choices at first. You have Syracuse and Indiana. You have a Syracuse team that is a little bit more pass-heavy. Does he fit that the way that you want to? Indiana, kind of the same thing. They had Curtis Rourke back there this year. It'd be a very different quarterback if they got Caden Salter back there next year. Be very talented, no doubt about that, but probably a little bit of a different approach from Kurt Cignetti and the boys up there. And then you do have Auburn, you do have Vandy, another one to watch. I think that's a really interesting one. If Diego Pavia were to not get another year of eligibility or were to get it and then leave Vanderbilt, which I think is a possibility here, I think that would be a great fit. I think Caden Salter would do an incredible job at Vanderbilt. Another guy that we'll talk about a little bit later, I think, would do that as well, but a lot of different guys here. I think the top 4 are the ones that stand out to me. Justin Martin was a very talented quarterback coming out of high school. Matthew Sluka, we've talked about plenty on here. Definitely a very interesting story, and we'll see what happens with him. Thomas Castellanos, Anthony Coulandria were starters in the ACC and are very athletic, very talented guys. I assume they'll get looks from someone. Don't really know what that will look like. Definitely could be even a group of 5 level. We'll see what happens with them. I do think they have the ability to start at the Power 4 level, but if they really want to open things up, if they really want to be special players, maybe the G5 is where they should set up shop. Ricky Collins, kind of the same. I think he probably would have been better off staying at LSU, but not my decision to make, obviously. We'll see what happens with him. Very talented kid. And then you got Holden Gariner, a very talented kid from Auburn. It looks like that Auburn quarterback group is going to get torn apart just a little bit in this transfer portal. We'll see what happens with that going forward. So a lot of really talented kids here. A lot of guys that I really like. Those 4 guys in particular, I think could be game changers wherever they go next. I think Miller Moss is a guy that could really take a team to a possible CFP berth. Even Jackson Arnold as well. Really like those 2 guys and cannot wait to see where they land. The portal group that you're going to want to watch is the wide receivers. This is an elite group. There's no doubt about that. And it starts with the guy up top there at Dane Key. Very, very talented. One of the game changers on this board, and definitely someone that wherever he goes, he's going to be a starter. He could be wide receiver 1 wherever he goes. And a lot of different teams that will be kind of circling him. A lot of different teams that will be after him. And it doesn't seem like there's any good intel out there right about now. Obviously, we will get that over the next couple of days, and we'll see when a decision is made early next week. But overall, very talented kid. Definitely one of those that is setting the pace for this wide receiver group. You do have Nick Anderson, a very talented guy from Oklahoma. When he is on the field, he is an absolute game changer. He is not always on the field. That is the issue with him. Obviously had some injury troubles this year, has had them throughout his career. It'll be interesting to see what the market is for him. I think it'll be plenty big, but definitely some teams that'll have a little bit of buyer beware type of energy with those injuries in his past. You have Casey Concepcion, you have Barry and Brown. Those are the game changers to me. Those are my 2 favorite guys of this group because they can do everything. They can do anything you want all over the field. You have, for game-breaking speed, those are your 2 guys in this group, no doubt about that. It sounds like Colorado might be the team to watch for Concepcion. I think Kansas State's in there, Penn State as well. A lot of different teams that will be calling him. And then Barry and Brown, it looks like a lot of SEC teams, LSU, Ole Miss, possibly even Florida State getting involved. So a lot of different people will be around those 2 guys. I think Micah Hudson is an interesting one here, a former 5-star receiver. He committed to Texas Tech a year ago, and looks like it could be LSU. It sounds like LSU is leading the way right about now. Would be a huge pickup for them. I still expect A&M to give a call at some point, but we'll see what happens there. I think LSU right now is the one setting the pace. And then you do have C.J. Daniels, a very talented guy there at 8. He's the guy that left LSU. Didn't necessarily hit the way that you wanted them to at LSU, but had a monster year at Liberty the year before that. South Carolina and Florida feel like the teams to watch there. So staying in the SEC, very talented kid. Whoever can get his hands on him is going to very much like him, no doubt about that. And then you have some other guys. You have Jonte Cook from Texas, very talented player that when he was on the field made plays for Texas. And then Eric Rivers, very talented kid from FIU, definitely going to be a big-time player for someone making that leap after the FIU firing. And then Kobe Prentice, a very talented guy from Bama. Amari Kelly, hadn't had the pleasure to watch him quite as much as I wanted to, but definitely a lot of things to like about that kid. So this is the this is the group, position group that I'm watching the most closely. These wide receivers are absolutely ridiculous. I only think they're going to get more ridiculous. So we'll talk about them as they do, obviously, but this is a huge group and definitely one to watch as we move forward. A lot of guys on here that will be big-time players for big-time programs next year. And then we'll just talk about the defense as a whole right here, and it starts with Prince Will Emmanuel. I've tried to figure out the name, finally did it. Prince Will Emmanuel, very talented defensive end from Nebraska. Brother was at Ole Miss this past year. If he wants to join his old head coach, it'll probably be at Florida State, or his old defensive coordinator, It'll be at Florida State. Very talented kid, and definitely one that a lot of teams will be calling for. So Florida State will have to fight for him, but feels like the team that might have the inside track right about now. Jaheim Otis, very big kid. Definitely a guy that will get a lot of look from a lot of big-time teams. Definitely a guy that can still play in the NFL. I thought it was a little bit weird when he left Alabama halfway through the year. It's going to be a guy that's going to be kicked around for a lot of big-time teams. I think Texas could get involved here. I think a lot of different teams could get involved with this kid. Definitely an absolute beast on the inside and could be an outright first-round pick in a couple of years. And then Julian Humphrey, we've talked about a little bit. A lot of different teams in on him. Feels like A&M could be the team to watch the most. A lot of different teams that will be kicking around for that. And then Keyshawn Silver, a very, very talented freak athlete at defensive tackle for Kentucky. I think there's a lot of different things going around here, but does seem like North Carolina is probably the team to watch most aggressively here. Sounds like he could be getting a pretty penny. It sounds like Pete Nakos was saying he could be the top paid non-quarterback transfer. That would be crazy. A very, very talented kid, and definitely one that if North Carolina can pull him in, he's going to be a game changer in the SEC next year. Then you got the safety from Purdue, very talented kid. This is experience. There's no doubt about that. This is the most experienced product probably on this list. Cole Wisnowski is a very talented guy as well, but freshman of the year in the Big Ten in 2023, there will be plenty of suitors, but Notre Dame feels like the team to beat right about now. Makes total sense with what those safeties can do on the field and what this guy can do. It's going to be a real match made in heaven if you were to end up at Notre Dame. I love Cole Wisnowski. I think he's very talented from NDSU. He's a very veteran player at that safety position. I think he's going to have a huge net to choose from. It'll be interesting to see if he makes the jump to the Power 4, if he makes the jump to a little bit lower of a level. I think he's ready for the Power 4. Very talented kid. And then you do have Deshaun Womack, very athletic edge rusher, hasn't quite hit the way that LSU wanted them to. Jakeem Jackson, very talented player on the edge for Florida. I think he could be a guy with a big-time net. Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy is kind of the same era of Jaheim Otis. Big kid, very highly recruited coming out of high school. I have to assume he gets some look. Kind of the same thing with Kelby Collins. A lot of really talented defensive tackles here that could totally change the way a team works. And I think when you talk about guys that you're going to want to watch, it's Uman Mielen. If FSU can get him in the cut, he's going to be a huge player for them. There's no doubt about that. And then a couple other players, just kind of watch here. Ahmad Hardy is a very talented running back from ULM. Went for over 1,300 yards this year, 13 touchdowns. Tons of teams are going to be out there looking for running backs. This is going to be the guy that I think they call most readily, at least right now. Obviously, more guys will be added to this group, but this is a freak. I think he's going to be an absolute dude in 2025 wherever he ends up, and I think he could end up at one of the big-time schools out there. Malachi Coleman, a former 5-star wide receiver coming out of Nebraska, has all the physical gifts you could possibly need to play wide receiver. The question is, can he put it all together? It's been a little bit of a slow start at Nebraska, hasn't been what he wanted it to be. It's definitely one of those buy low, sell high type of guys. If you can get him in the right situation, give him the right opportunities, he's going to make all types of plays for you. Now, it's been a little bit of a tightrope walk for Nebraska to do that. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up, what the market looks like for him. If it's really big, a lot of teams feel very confident in his athletic ability. If it's a little bit smaller, they're seeing what they're seeing on film and they don't necessarily love it. So definitely will be interesting to watch that kid. I think he's one of the boomer bust type potential guys in this class. But then you got Hunter Zambrano, one of the few offensive linemen in the portal right now, kind of the world of the portal. You're not going to get a lot of elite offensive linemen out of the portal. This might be one of the guys that you do. An interior offensive lineman, 6'5", 300 pounds from Illinois State. This guy can go. Really, really talented guy and definitely will get his fair share of looks. Feel like Ohio State might be in on this one. I don't have any intel on that, but they need their offensive lineman, and this guy is right in the neighborhood. Would not be surprised if Ohio State got involved in this one, and there's a lot of different things that could happen around this guy. Very, very talented and definitely could be a huge player for someone that goes on a title run next year. Oh, excuse me, missed out on one here. I did want to talk about Devon Dampier, a very talented player from New Mexico, the quarterback there, and definitely a guy that I think will get a ton of looks out there. I think Vanderbilt could be an interesting one if Diego Pavia were to move on. I think he would thrive in that system. His coach, Bronco Mendenhall, just got hired at Utah State, so maybe there's a little pull there. It'll be interesting to see what he ends up as. I think that's one of the guys that I like the most in this portal right now, and definitely will be interesting to see what happens. But that's the tip of the iceberg. I think we all understand that's going to get more and more crazy over the next little bit. It opens officially on Monday, so obviously we'll update you throughout the week. This definitely will be a fairly significant or fairly consistent segment as we go throughout the next month or so on here, so we'll keep you updated with everything you need to know. It's going to get crazy. There's no doubt about that. But we'll take our third break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about players and coaches under the most pressure as they head into this weekend. I think Dan Lanning might take the cake. Quinn Ewers is not far behind him, so we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the portal, kind of broke down all the different big-time players in there, a lot of really talented wide receivers and a lot of really talented quarterbacks that I assume we'll get a little bit more crazy as we move on. But let's get to the players and the coaches under the most pressure as we head into this weekend. And it's quite a big list, frankly. There's a lot of different guys. Pretty much every single guy on every single team is under quite a bit of pressure as we head into this weekend. But I wanted to start with Dan Lanning. I think he has an interesting position as you go into the end of this year because you were roughly in this position last year. Now, not quite in the catbird seat that you are right now, but you were in with a win over Washington. I think everyone felt that way. I don't think it was much of a question, frankly. If they were to beat Washington, they were probably in the dance. They came up a little bit short. Now you're in a position where you're in the dance regardless. There's no doubt about that. You were going to be in this thing, but you kind of want to send a message. You kind of want to be the team that's the number one team in the country, that's the betting favorite going in to win the national title, that is the team to beat. I think this is the moment where they kind of put their flag in the Big Ten, where they win it, they dominate another big-time team in the Big Ten. They beat Ohio State earlier in this year. Beating Penn State this time around would be huge to kind of show yourself that you can beat all three of the big-time teams. As you came in, it was Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan. You would have beaten all three of them in 1 year in your very first year in the conference. That would be a huge statement to just about everyone else. And the big thing here is just keeping your guys engaged, keeping your guys as locked in as they were in week 1 as they will be in week 13. That is not an easy thing to do. It is a very, very difficult thing to keep your guys fully engaged the entire year. We've seen different moments where Oregon has waned just a little bit in that Wisconsin game and some others, but at the end of the day, he's done a great job. He's done a really, really incredible job of just making sure that everyone is ready to roll, that everyone is playing with kind of reckless abandon at certain moments, a lot of really good energy around there, and I think these defenses are going to be tested a ton. You know, his X's and O's are going to get a little bit more complicated, they're going to get a little bit tougher to game plan for because you're playing an elite quarterback pretty much every single time you get on the field. You're playing an elite offense pretty much every single time you get on the field, so if they want to finish up top, it has to be elite X's and O's, it has to be elite motivation, and it has to be a guy that makes all the right decisions when they badly need him to. I think the decision against Wisconsin to run a fake field goal was an interesting one. He got away with it. Maybe you can't make that decision in these big-time moments this weekend and beyond this season. And then on the other sideline will be Drew Aller and this Penn State team, and I think you have everything right there. You have everything right there, and Michigan gave you the opportunity to get everything right there where you can win this game, possibly get the 1 seed in the CFP, and suddenly be the team to beat in this race. Obviously, plenty of people would still be doubting Penn State. I'm not doubting that by any means, but he's got to play his best game of the year if you're Drew Aller. One way or the other, you have to be able to put points on the board because Oregon's going to. They're going to find a way to put points on the board in this game. You might just have to go punch for punch with them. If you can't, then you very well could get boat raced in this game. You're going to have to be very careful about the way you go about business. Now, the good thing for him is the run game should get going in this one. You have 2 good of running backs. You have a very solid offensive line. You should be able to run the ball with minor success, at least in this one. But at the end of the day, at some point, Drew Aller is going to have to step up. He's going to have to go punch for punch with Dillon Gabriel in this Oregon offense. Does he have that ability? And at some point this playoff, and maybe even on Saturday, he's going to have to prove that one way or the other. Quinn Ewers, I've talked about this before. I think he's the most important player when you talk about the CFP race going forward, and you're stepping into an SEC championship where you can kind of stop all the talk. There's a lot of people that are saying that maybe it should be Arch Manning that gets the start over the next little bit. He's the one that can give them a national title chance, and then you have others talking about Quinn Ewers as if he's just not very good at football. I don't agree with that by any means. I think he's very talented, very good player. And frankly, if they were to win this weekend, you have a chance to give yourself a national title, a real national title chance as the 2 or the 1 seed. Your NFL draft stock would go up by an insane amount. You would be in a really, really good position if you were able to go out there and play your best football. You know, he's played it at different moments this year. It's been a little bit hit or miss at different times. You know, played an incredible game against Michigan, got injured, had a little bit of rough stretch in the middle, played really good football in certain parts of that game against A&M, including that second quarter. Is going to have to play that throughout the 4 quarters he has on Saturday and really going forward. This team is going to get after him. They're going to make him move, and he's going to have to rise to the challenge, or it's going to look a lot like it did the first time around in Austin. Malachi Starks is the guy that I'm talking about for Georgia, and it's a little bit off the beaten path, but when I talk about this defense overall, I think they just need a guy. They need a guy that can make that big-time play like he does right there, or he can, get everyone set, and he's really the general of that back end, and when you talk about Georgia right now, I think the back end might be the most important. Obviously, the front 7 is where their money is made. That's where a lot of the really talented athletes are. That's where a lot of the guys that are going to change the game will be. if that back end can hold up, if that back end can say, we got 5 guys back here, we don't have to worry about, dropping more linebackers into coverage, dropping possibly Jalen Walker, some of these edge rushers into coverage, we don't have to worry about that. We can handle the back end. Y'all do what you do. They're going to be able to get after the quarterback. They're going to be one of the better defenses in the entire thing, because when Jalen Walker, when Mykel Williams are just let off the leash and let go to work, it's a problem for just about anyone on the offensive line. So you're in a position where you need the back end to step up, and sometimes it just comes down to the guy that leads your group, the guy that's kind of the leader of your team in a lot of different ways, just to step up in big time moments. When he's in that building, he likes to make big time plays. We'll see if he can do it on Saturday and then going forward the rest of the way this season. Cam Skattebo is a guy that I think he might be the single most important player this weekend, in championship weekend, because you don't have Jordan Tyson. If you're Arizona State, you're not going to have the passing game that you're very comfortable to have with Jordan Tyson. So now you're going to have to find openings with Cam Skattebo. You should be able to find openings. This Iowa State run defense is not necessarily elite by any means. You should be able to find a way to run the ball, to find a way to get downfield, and find a way to get Cam Skattebo rolling. It's going to be a tall order, because Iowa State knows that. Iowa State knows that the back end should be more than fine against the receivers that they have. They're going to lend a lot of guys to the box. They're going to lend a lot of guys to hitting Cam Skattebo and making sure that he doesn't necessarily have the strength to go full 4 quarters at his full strength. So definitely a lot of things to watch. He's going to have to step up big, and without Jordan Tyson, this offense can be anemic at times. It's going to come down to Cam Skattebo to make sure it doesn't get to that point. Dabo Swinney he was given a chance, and kind of like the same thing at Penn State, but frankly, Clemson has no business being in this position, but they're in a position where they can beat SMU, be one of the teams that gets the bye in this thing, and then we'll see what happens from there. A very, very interesting moment. I do have Clemson winning this game, which I didn't feel great doing, if I'm being honest. Love SMU, but at the end of the day, I just couldn't go away from Dabo Swinney and Clemson. And I think more than anything, it's just proving that you're still Clemson. We just talked about them in the recruiting world. They're not doing enough. They're definitely fading in that respect, in the talent respect. And now you're just going to have to figure out what happens. If you lose here, you're 2 years without an ACC title, without a CFP berth, and more than that, without a CFP berth, and you're going to have to figure out what happens going forward. You're going to have to figure out what the portal looks like this offseason, if it looks like anything this offseason, and then see what happens in 2025. This is a huge weekend for Dabo Swinney, where a lot of things could change for the better or for the worse around there, and the worst feels a little bit more attainable right about now. So it's going to be interesting to see what they can do. Obviously have to scale their performance in a better way than they have all year. Lost to the 3 best teams that they played all year, so they're going to have to play better football. There's no doubt about that, and we'll see what they can do, and maybe it changes this program for the better or the worse this upcoming weekend. And then we'll talk about the coach that's doing it tonight. Barry Odom has a huge one tonight, and he's been one of the biggest names on the coaching market the last couple of weeks. It could be delayed a couple of weeks if he were able to win this one, but he's more than fine to do that. He is more than happy to wait a little bit to take that new job and take his team to the possible playoff. Now, he's going to have his hands full. You're going to have to slow down Ashton Genty, who we'll talk about here in a second, but a very, very tough guy to deal with. And frankly, the first time around, he did a relatively good job. He still got his. He still got over 100 yards, still got a touchdown, still was a big-time player in that game. You're going to have to do maybe even a little bit better this time around. And overall, even beyond Barry Odom, this staff in general has a couple of guys that are going to be big-time names on the coaching market. Brendan Marion is a guy that I absolutely love. I think is going to get, at the very least, a big-time offensive coordinator position. I've seen Oklahoma State be kicking around that name a little bit, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Definitely would be a huge feather in their cap if they were able to get to the playoff and walk into that room and say, I can take your team to possibly play for a national title, and not be a little bit facetious on that. You're in a really good position going forward. So I think it's a huge weekend for Barry Odom and Brendan Marion to just make a little bit of money. Let's be totally honest. So the way they'll do it is slowing down this guy and finding a way to beat this guy. And it's really the last chance to steal some votes for number 12 over there in Boulder. You're going to have to find a way to possibly put on a performance that takes people by storm. It's going to be really, really hard to do. I'll be totally honest. Feel like the gap is pretty aggressive right about now. I think Travis Hunter's pretty much locked that thing up. That being said, you put up 300 yards and 3 scores on tonight, a lot of people will be finding their way to find a way to vote for Ashton Genty in this thing. So, not saying he'll win it, but definitely a moment where you could take over the game, be in a position where maybe there's a little bit of more intrigue going into that Heisman ceremony. But even beyond that, you have the ability to take your team to the CFP, be the number 1 running back in the country, one of the best running backs in recent history, and play for a national title. So, plenty of pressure beyond the draft stock and beyond all the craziness around some of the different Heisman stuff and that type of thing. But at the end of the day, That's what we're talking about. When we're talking about Ashton Genty, we'll see if he can possibly get back into that dance. I think it'd be really hard to do, but maybe he has that ability. Who knows? But it's an incredible group. I think when you talk about Championship Saturday just overall, it's always going to be a nightmare. There's always going to be a lot of people. There's always going to be a lot of individuals that have to deal with a ton of pressure going into this weekend. I think Dan Lanning might take the cake. I think he's in a position where everything you want is right in front of you. You've done an incredible job of building up this program to what it's been today, to getting it recruiting at a level that is absolutely elite in every sense of the word. Now it's about finishing in the job. Now it's about doing the things on the field that show what you're doing behind the scenes is working, that show, you are moving in the right direction. You're the number one team in the country. You're undefeated. You're playing incredible football. You lose on Saturday. There's a lot of different conversations happening. There's some conversations of, is Oregon not quite as good as we thought? Are there no elite teams, and Oregon just another team that is kind of in this hodgepodge of good but not great teams? You're in a position where a lot of people are questioning whether or not you were just a team that can get up for big moments in the regular season but can't quite get up for those big-time games in the postseason. There's going to be a lot of questions. If Dan Lanning were to go down this weekend, Quinn Ewers kind of the exact same thing. If they were to go down this weekend and possibly Quinn Ewers were to turn over the ball a couple of times or get sacked a couple of times, there's going to be a lot of arch talk as you get a little bit closer to CFP, whether that's fair or not. There's going to be a lot of it, and you're going to have to figure out how to navigate that, and it comes down to this weekend. If you win this weekend, a lot of that conversation will go away. If you don't win this weekend, that conversation will get louder and louder, and you'll have to figure out how you handle it. So a lot of different people, a lot of different players and coaches under a ton of pressure this weekend. Dan Lanning might take the cake. Quinn Ewers might be very shortly behind him. So a lot of different things going into this week, and obviously we will update you on all of it on Monday when we get back, but let's get to a little bit of weekend wrap-up after this break. We'll take a break here, and then we'll get to a couple of headlines, some coaching carousel stuff, some injury news, just some random stuff just to get you a little bit of a wrap-up as we get into this upcoming weekend. So stick with us, and we'll be right back with that. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the players and coaches under the most pressure as we head into this weekend, and now it's time to do a little bit of a wrap-up. We'll get to a couple of different headlines and things around the world of college football real quick, and then we'll get some injury news before we get into this weekend. So let's start with some headlines, and we'll get into the ACC and the Big 10, or Big 12 to start, It sounds like the conversations between these two parties have started around the future of college football, what that's going to look like for these two groups, how it's going to fit into what the Big 10 and the SEC want to do, a lot of different things on the table for this one. It sounds like it could be a couple of these different super leagues on the table, whether it's College Student Football League or the Project Rudy, a lot of different ideas that the ACC and the Big 12 are a little bit more interested in than the SEC and the Big 10 are because of their standing in this whole thing. They want to be locked in. They want to be in a position where they are firmly in the Super League. They're firmly in whatever the future of college football looks like. The SEC and the Big 10 kind of want to dictate what the future of college football looks like, and they want them to be at the top of it. So a lot of different things that will happen over the next little bit. There's obviously something that the ACC probably had to do, and the ACC and the Big 12 probably had to do, because you don't join forces, you're not going to be able to stand up to those two that have pretty much joined forces throughout the last little bit, and you're going to have to meet in February to figure out all the future of the 12-team playoff, of a lot of different stuff around college football, and you're not going to be able to hold up if you're not united in this. If you're not with each other, if you're not having each other's back in this moment, it's going to be a really, really long day. So this makes total sense, these two kind of getting together. Sounds like a lot of different things were discussed whether it was, a possible alliance, a possible merger between the two conferences to make a super conference. A lot of different things have been kind of kicked around in this, and I think it comes down to a lot of different debates that you've had around college football, and it comes down to that guy in a lot of different ways. Brett Yormark is a very intense fella. He's a very intense guy, definitely a guy that knows how to get stuff done, came from the TV world, is officially in college sports, and it's been very clear that he's from the TV world. Definitely a very intense negotiator, a guy that can get a lot of things done, and you're in a position right now where you're going to need that guy. You're going to need to go into that room with a lot of confidence, with a lot of assuredness in yourself, and it's going to be one of these guys that's going to need to step up to the plate and kind of take on a Greg Sankey, to take on a Tony Petitti and see where they stand at the end of this. Brett Yormark, probably the quote-unquote enforcer of this group, the guy that can stand up in front of a room and gain a lot of respect, and we'll see what happens with this. But you're definitely in a position where the Big 12 and the ACC just kind of have to do this. One way or the other, they're going to have to be able to merge and have their interests kind of be aligned, because you're going to have to attack the other two. One way or the other, you're going to have to work with / attack the other two and figure out where you stand at the end of it. But overall, a lot of different things were discussed. A possible schedule merger, which I would absolutely love. One of the things that I've been pushing for quite some time is just all these conferences to have a little bit of a scheduling merger where all 4 of them are in a pool. They kind of rotate around, play different conferences every single year. But obviously something that is a little bit far-fetched as of right this moment. Hopefully we're heading in that direction. We'll see what happens with this alliance, and definitely will be one that in February, when they meet to figure out what the 12-team playoff will look like, it'll be a very explosive meeting, I have to imagine. But let's get into some coaching carousel stuff, and let's start with the weirdest one of the bunch. Bill Belichick sounds like he is interviewed for the UNC opening. I don't think this is going to happen, if I'm being totally honest. I do think it's one of those things that was really cool to see across their Twitter page, was really cool to think about. I don't think he's taking the UNC job. I think there might be a little bit of interest there. I don't expect him to be the next coach of the Tar Heels. So a really incredible kind of thing that I did not expect by any means. We'll see what happens. Who knows? Maybe there's a little bit of an opening here, but it doesn't sound like there's too much of an opening for Bill Belichick to take the UNC job. But maybe it does show that he's at least interested in the college level, and maybe we'd be more willing for a bigger job down the road. Then you'd have Lincoln Riley and UCF. This was one of the other head-scratching headlines that we saw this past week, and it was UCF reaching out to USC to just see what the interest level was from Lincoln Riley. Felt like one of those you might as well call type of calls, but at the end of the day, very interesting. One of those things that kind of gives you the idea of what's happening over there at USC. Seems like a lot of other people in the industry think that relationship is not quite going the way that they want it to. Now, Lincoln Riley has totally shot this down, said he's very happy where he is. We'll obviously keep an eye out on it. I don't expect him to be the next coach of UCF. He could not be the coach of USC next year. We'll see what happens there. Definitely a lot of NFL jobs and some different things that could come available. It'll be interesting to see what Lincoln Riley does at the end of this year, but probably not going to be UCF. I assume it will be USC next year, but still a little bit up in the air around him. Texas Tech made their coordinator hire. They lost Zach Kittley to FAU as their head coach last week, and they got Mac Leftwich, a very talented guy, the OC from Texas State. He's done an incredible job over there with the Bobcats, and I think he will do an incredible job at Texas Tech. He probably won't be there long, if I'm being totally honest. I think this guy's head coach written all over him, but he's in a position right now where you officially made that jump to the Power 4 level. Now it's about kind of scaling your performance and doing a little bit better than you were at Texas State, and then see if you can get that head coaching job. He's a very, very talented guy, and I think Texas Tech did a great job kind of filling a Zach Kittley hire that was absolutely incredible by FAU. Tony Sunseri is this might be my favorite hire of the cycle thus far. It sounds like he could be making his way over to LA. It sounds like he might be the new Bruins offensive coordinator. Eric Bieniemy was fired yesterday, something that a lot of people expected. I don't think there was any question that was going to happen. They pretty much immediately hired Tony Sunseri, the Indiana co-offensive coordinator, and as their OC. This dude is a beast. He's absolutely incredible. Did a great job at JMU with Tony Centeno, very talented kid, and definitely a guy that is going to be a huge factor for UCLA going forward. Feels like the Bruins have something going over there. Feels like the Bruins have something brewing over there. A very, very talented guy, and definitely a staff that feels like it's going in the right direction. Maybe they're about to lap USC. As crazy as that sounds, UCLA is putting together a real staff that could be a load to deal with in the Big Ten next year. Matt Entz is back as a head coach after a short stint with USC as the linebackers coach. It is Fresno State that has hired him. He went 60-10 while at NDSU and won some national titles while there. He's an incredible guy. He a really incredible head coach. Obviously got to the Power 4 level, just make sure that he was there before all the craziness happened, but handled business, was able to take over for Jeff Tedford over there at Fresno State, and cannot wait to see what this guy can do. I think he's going to be an incredible head coach, and we'll be in the Pac-12 here pretty soon with Fresno State. Trent Dilfer is going to be retained from at UAB. Relatively shocking news, if I'm being totally honest. I think Trent Dilfer is a fine head coach. It was a weird year over there at UAB with a lot of different questions, with a lot of different things on the table, and a lot of things for them to figure out. So it is going to be him going forward. It is going to be him in the next little bit, and we'll see what happens over there in UAB as he heads into his third year. But a lot of questions. I'll leave it at that for the time being. Definitely one of those that will be kind of on a hot seat heading into 2025. And we'll see if he's able to survive that, if he's able to curb a lot of the noise that is around him right now, because I don't think the fans are too happy about this one, if I'm being totally honest. We'll see what happens here. Obviously, a guy that is capable of coaching winning football, but just hasn't quite yet around UAB. Urban Meyer had to come out and dispel some of the rumors talking about him possibly taking the Ohio State job back. He is not doing that. He has put all of his energy behind Ryan Day. Makes total sense. Very confusing times around Columbus. I've heard some murmurs. I won't necessarily say too aggressively, but it sounds like Ryan Day might be looking out. A lot of questions. I'll leave it at that for Ohio State right now. Definitely one of those things that you don't like to do if you're Urban Meyer. You don't like to have to come out and say that you're not taking the job from the guy that you gave the job to. But that's the position that they're in right now. We'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks. Maybe all of this talk is ridiculous in a couple of weeks because they're on their way to the national title. But as of right now, Urban Meyer had to come out and say that he is not going to take that job. Very weird around Ohio State right about now. We'll see what happens going forward. But definitely something that I was not expecting to see around this time of year. This is what we got for Ohio State. Moving on to a couple of injury updates as we head into this weekend. We'll start with Georgia, Texas. They're both relatively healthy heading into this one. For Georgia, they do have Trevor Etienne and Christian Miller, a running back and a defensive tackle, both listed as questionable. Will be huge players. Christian Miller is an absolute beast on the inside. Trevor Etienne was probably the best player on the field the last time these two met, outside of Jalen Walker, but he was a huge player for that offense in that game, and definitely will be a huge loss for this one. We'll see if Nate Frazier and those other running backs can pick up the slack there. For Texas, it's Kelvin Banks that is questionable for this game, the very talented offensive lineman. The way that I see it right now, I think Etienne is probably really unlikely to go. I think Kelvin Banks and Christian Miller are probably pretty likely to go. Depending on how long they'll stay in, I don't know. Definitely one of those things where Kelvin Banks is one that I'm a little bit up in the air with. Maybe we'll see Trevor Gooseby again come in for him, but definitely one of those things where two very talented guys on the offensive line that or on the lines of scrimmage that I do think will step up to the plate. I do think will play this weekend. How long do they play? How effective are they? How close to 100% are they? Is a big time question. And then I just don't think Trevor Etienne's going to go in this game, with the Texas defense loves to see after the last time they met him. And then Oregon, Penn State. This is one where feels like both teams are relatively healthy. Penn State sounds like they're going to get back Harrison Wallace as they head into this one, and that's huge. It's one of those players that you felt a little bit nervous about going into this weekend. Doesn't sound like it's going to be much of a problem. He should be ready to roll for this game, as well as a couple other rotational players on the back end. Then you do have Oregon. The big one here is Matthew Bedford is going to be out for the year in the interior of that offensive line. Could be a huge thing. With guys like Xanderin and Danny Dennis-Sutton on the other side, it could be a huge thing if he's not ready to go. Well, he'll not be ready to go. So we'll see what happens with his offensive line. They've done a great job picking up the slack for him since he's had a little bit of a limit on him throughout most of the year. So we'll see what happens with that offensive line, but definitely a huge loss there. Keon Hudson-Ware is another name to watch, where looks like he's relatively questionable right now. It'll be interesting to see if he does go. If he does go, how close to 100% is he? Is the offensive line for Penn State able to push him around a little bit? A lot of different things on the table for Oregon. So nothing necessarily major that they didn't know going into this week, like Matthew Bedford. They knew that going into this week, but outside of that, a couple of guys that could be banged up that could possibly have an effect on this game. And then you got SMU, Clemson. SMU's in great shape. They're in really, really good shape. They are very healthy. Sounds like they could get back Romello Brinson in this game. So a lot of different things coming up for SMU. Since RJ Maryland went down, really, they've been a very healthy team for the majority of this year. Sounds like they will be that way tomorrow. And then for Clemson, Tyler Brown is not on track to, is on track to not play in this one. Wanted to make sure I read that right, but very talented guy. There's some optimism out there that he could possibly go. It doesn't sound like it's great, and if he does go, he probably won't be all that close to 100%. So definitely something to watch. Another playmaker on the outside for Clemson that could be just a little bit banged up going into this one. And then Arizona State, Iowa State. The news for Arizona State we've talked about a lot. Jordan Tyson. That is a huge loss for them, and definitely will be interesting to see if there's any wide receivers that step up in his stead. Iowa State, you're healthy right now. You're feeling pretty good going into this game. No lingering injuries no aggressive injuries. There's always lingering injuries this time of year, but Iowa State seems to be relatively healthy right now. They're going to go into this thing fully locked and loaded in. We'll see what happens in this one. Cannot wait. And overall, this weekend's going to be absolutely incredible. Cannot wait for these championship matchups to get underway. Cannot wait for Selection Sunday to start. And a lot of people to get mad, if we're being totally honest. If Clemson were to win and SMU were to be left out, I would be one of those people. But we'll talk about that on Monday, obviously. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people doing great work across every single sport you could want. So if you're not just a college football person, if you're an every sport person, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening. We will be back on Monday to talk about the championship games, to talk about the playoff, to talk about just about everything around college football. So I'll see you then.